Roy Sloan was just a guy who was one of the funniest guys I ever knew. And so we had very similar wacky senses of humor. Because all we did when we went out on a Friday night, and there was a whole gang of us, that this was what we did every Friday and Saturday night, or Saturday night we went down to the gay bars. But all we did there was have fun. That's my memories, and it was non-stop fun. And that was our really only outlet to be really our gay selves, and they were gay havens in the day. That's where you could go and feel safe and everything else. But Roy was, I mean, that's my memories of him, as we were just buds. He was a travel agent in town. His sense of humor was so wacky that when we were trying to figure out how to get the message out in those days, there was no social media as we know it to this day, nothing online even. We had a list of all the periodicals in BC that we could issue a press release to. And he discovered one called the Jewish Western Bulletin that he didn't even know about. But anyway, he started to compose in his mind a headline for the Jewish Western Bulletin. And they would find Roy and they would pronounce him to be the Jewish community proud to announce their first AIDS person, Roy Sloan. But that was simply his wacky sense of humor and how to have fun with it. And it was a hot August day, and I went by and he was out in his garden and he had long pants on. He wasn't really dressed for the weather, in my opinion. But anyway, he had some news for me. He lifted his pants and his leg was already riddled with KS. And he had just got back from Vancouver. I was the first person he told, literally. And he'd gone over to Vancouver because there was nothing here, but there was AIDS Vancouver at that point in time, which was small and grassroots and everything else. And so we went over there and got a lot of information and comfort and resources and all sorts of things. But we said then, you know, this is bad. We need something in Victoria. And it was only a week or two later he said to me, well, John Spencer, who I also knew, but I didn't know him as well as Roy, wants a few of us to get together and see what we can do. Because John Spencer was also positive, and he tested by, I don't know, we've had that term at the point, but he had a diagnosis, whatever the term was. And it turned out he had been infected. This is flashing forward, he found this out by one of the very first persons ever infected in BC. So it kind of had that depth of the roots. So anyway, he said, well, come to John's house next Tuesday or Wednesday, whichever it was. And John, that's where we had, I mentioned we had that garage sale. And so 5 of us around the kitchen table, that's when I met Wayne Cook for the first time, who was a nurse at Jubilee Hospital, and Grant Sullivan. And I don't remember sort of the gist of the meeting. It wasn't like a formal meeting at all. We just said, let's do something. We decided that we would just have a helpline, and just so that we could answer the phone to anybody. We didn't profess to be professional about what to say and how to run it, but we had enough faith in each other. So I approached the telephone company because we wanted the telephone number to be a 38 number. That's the old days when there were core exchanges and you couldn't move phones around. And I was the only one in the exchange. So we had a phone TELUS, BC Tel at the time, and I told them what we're up to and everything else. And the person on the other end was really, really receptive and open. Because again, it's still the time when people, hey, we don't want anything to do with that, but they were anything but. And one of the phone numbers of AVI is the phone number we gave, and it's still in existence today. So we put it into my house because it had to go somewhere. And that was when something called call forwarding had just been invented, believe it or not. So I figured out what that was, and we forwarded the phone to each of our homes one night a week. So that was literally our very first project, was to have a helpline, and we just did it. I mean, we didn't have discussions about it or anything, we just did it. And it became obvious, and then it became obvious fairly soon that we would need to be a little better organized and more formal about things. We might want some office space and everything. And I worked for a BC government agency at the time that looked after all provincial buildings, office buildings and facilities. And I'd gone to my boss and told him what I was doing. I was always trepidatious to tell people what I'm doing, but he was very, very receptive and open. Again, long story short, he found us an office in one of the old heritage houses on Superior Street for nothing. So, and it was just, a little cubbyhole, but it was a gift from them, really, and we transferred the phone line down there. The same boss, who was actually the president at the time of the Crown Corporation, happened to be head of the United Way that year, the figurehead, not the executive director. And he actually came to me, I guess he knew we were fumbling around for money and asking him how to do grant proposals and all this sort of stuff. And he said that United Way at the time had all their core agencies, and I think they still do. They have core agencies that they fund every year and that count on money from them, essentially. And then they kept back a pot of money from each campaign. I went to the guys on the board and said, look, my boss has said there's a chance we could get outreach grants. That's what they were called outreach grants. We could get an outreach grant, and what do you think? And again, we didn't have a lot of formalities to go through, so long story short, I wrote literally a one-pager saying these are the things that we'd like to do if we have some money. And I think at that point we had money from a couple of garage sales and whatever, and barely paid the phone bills, but that was it, like hundreds of dollars, nothing more. Any money that we could get towards these would be extremely helpful, and that was my proposal, literally. No fancier words or anything else than that. And we ended up getting, I think, about $8,000 handed to us, which was a fortune, and which ultimately got put to good use. But what we found out at the time was that this was the first ever United Way money anywhere in North America that went to an AIDS organization. So we were, I guess, the first to apply, but we also got it. And that was sort of a feather in our cap, because that was an obvious source of funding. So that was a good moment amongst many. I still remember our very first letterhead. People were volunteering to do stuff for us all the time. And let me design a letterhead. What will we put on it? We put on 3 words: information, education, and direct services, out of the blue. And it's amazing that today those probably could sum up the focuses too. Providing information to people, educating them. And the one that I was most passionate about was direct services, because I cared so much about the people that were positive. For me personally, I had a lot of very, very close friends in Victoria, in the gay community. And I came to Victoria in 1978, and I had really just come out of my closet a little while before that. So all these friends were hardcore friends. They were just the best, and I think I lost every single one of them to the crisis. Sean Costello, who was a very significant volunteer, and when he passed fairly early in the epidemic too, and his family didn't want any of us at his funeral, any of us being those that were close friends and involved with AIDS one way or another. And they were a very Catholic family, but we went anyway, and almost, just challenging them. And we even went out to, he's out at Hatley Park Cemetery out there, and just stood in the background. We had to stand in the background rather than be welcomed by the family as a close friend of their lost son. I had taken Roy to the General Hospital in Helmicon. It was a brand new hospital at the time. He had phoned and said, I think I need to go over to the hospital. And I took him over, and it turned out that he never left that hospital, but he went right into intensive care. But I never got to see him. They wouldn't let non-family in. The family wouldn't let non-family in to see him. They weren't that interested in how we knew Roy, their son, and that was tough. I used to, when I lived in Victoria, I would go out to Roy's gravesite every year and just sat, and then even the groundskeepers of the Jewish cemetery, it's a beautiful place up there, got to know me, and they knew I was just visiting. In a nutshell, it means that 5 guys with no idea what they're doing can get together and create something pretty, in the long run, pretty formidable. You don't know it at the time that what you're doing is significant. All you're doing is what you feel needs to be done. It didn't even seem like a big deal. We better just get on with this. And so the fact that we had this inclination to do something about it, however simple, because it was pretty simple. There were 5 of us for a while, and then we'd invite people to board meetings, and it grew from there. So I'm just proud of the fact that we, in effect, didn't sit in our asses and went and did something. It has survived and thrived and been a very formidable force in the local HIV/AIDS community, and it's not without a bit of pride that myself and the others, as we watched it grow and we drew back, we're kind of happy to see it happening. We said in the early days our fondest wishes was that someday it would not be necessary to have an AVI, and we're a long way towards that from where we were.